All right, hi guys. I'm about to do a lesson on landscapes today. This is one of the last things that we're going to be looking at for Unit 5. And so I want to go through the notes with you, and I actually want to go show you guys some stuff out in the field. So later on in this video, you'll see some videos of me out in the field. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Anyway, I just wanted to show you that you can always follow along with the notes that I'm taking because everything's online. And so if you look on the bulletin board of your class page, you guys know about the daily agendas link, but there's also a link that says class documents. And if you click on that class documents link, it's going to take you to this page, which shows you like all of the stuff, including the agendas that's there, and then labs and homework and notes and stuff like that. So here's the notes. Here's Unit 5. This is where we're finishing up. And here's the notes on landscapes, which I already actually have opened up over here. So we're going to start with this set of notes on landscapes, and I just want to talk about this in general. You guys don't need to really copy stuff down because you have this in front of you. You can use this while you're doing anything in the future. So landscapes. A landscape, as it says on the screen, is a region that's defined by similarities in shape and climate and its geologic setting. And there are really only 3 different types of landscapes around the world, and we're going to be looking at those 3 examples. But the 3 different types are related by landforms that they might have. So, the similarity in the bedrock, what type of bedrock, what that bedrock looks like, as well as on the surface, how tall the hills are and how flat it is, as well as what we call drainage systems, which I'm going to actually treat in a separate video. So let's take a look at our first type of landscape region, which is called a plain. And a plain is essentially just a really, really flat area of the country. It's typically low-lying, which means it's like low elevation, closer to the ocean at sea level. And so you'll find this around the borders of continents, as well as in the interior of continents. But it's really flat, and you can see really, really far. Now, the type of bedrock that we find in plains are sedimentary, completely sedimentary rocks. So shale, limestone, sandstone, all the sedimentary rocks that you'll find on page 7 of your reference table. These areas are known for farming, and they have a really thick soil layer, and that's mostly due to all the stuff that runs off the hills and mountains down into these areas before it reaches the ocean. So nice thick soil, good for farming. If you look at the next type of landscape region, that kind of summarizes all of our stuff about plains. The next type of landscape region is called a plateau. A plateau is a region that's in some ways similar to a plain, but in this case, there's a little bit more what we call relief. Relief is referring to the change in elevation. So it's not as flat anymore. We're talking about some hills, rolling hills. If it's a humid climate, and maybe more steppe-like hills in a more desert-like environment. So again, same type of bedrock as the plains, sedimentary primarily, so sandstone, limestone, shale, but a little bit more hilly. Not as rugged, not as steep as the mountains, but it's kind of somewhere in between. And we'll be looking at that out in the field a little bit later on. And one thing I want to note about this picture here at the bottom, let me get my pointer. This region here is actually just south of us. This is Route 79, which is close to Cortland area going towards Ithaca. That's you can see the rolling country, and if you go down 81, which I'm going to be going down in that region a little bit later on, it's nice rolling hills. This area you can see in the background, that's the Grand Canyon. As you can see, it doesn't look as like rolling, but there are big changes of relief. So it drops down into canyons and then back up again really steep. The difference between this and this is just climate. So you have a lot more weathering going on here, a lot more rolling hills. This has a lot less weathering because it's less humid. Okay, so that's a plateau. And now we'll move on to mountains. So our last landscape region are called mountains. And these are obviously areas with a lot more change in elevation, very, very steep and typically a lot younger material as well. Now, you'll notice in the picture, and it does say this in the text as well, that there are these really massive changes in the bedrock, what we call folds. This is a fold here where the bedrock has been squished together, almost like you're bringing both sides together and squeezing it. Okay, and you can do that like with a piece of paper. I happen to have my reference table right next to me, so I'll use that. So if you push on both sides of the paper, it squeezes and bends and folds. Okay, so a fold is due to the pressure that's on both sides. And in the case of a mountain, we're talking about extreme pressures and changes of big plates smashing into each other and creating big changes in elevation. So you'll see folds. You'll also see faults. And faults are where you cut through the bedrock, and we'll look at a picture of that a little bit later on. But again, big changes in elevation and major changes to the bedrock. Now, the type of bedrock that you find in the mountains is typically not sedimentary. It's usually metamorphic or igneous rock, which is a really good indicator that it's a mountain region. And obviously, if you think about New York State and you think about all three of these landscape regions, we have all three types here in New York State, which is actually kind of convenient. It's nice that we don't live in Kansas where it would be completely a plain. We live in New York where there's a little bit of variety. So let's take a look at a question. Whoops, this is actually showing you the answer. I should have presented it like this. That's better. Okay, so you already know the answer, but it says which block diagram below best represents a plateau. And a plateau, again, we're talking about nice sedimentary bedrock, but changes in elevation. So there's some relief to this thing. So if you look at the other diagrams, you know what the answer is. It's going to be this one, right? Hint, hint. But if you look at the other pictures, you'll see there's a lot of folding going on here. You'll see there's like a cut through this one. There's this folding action going on here. There's an igneous rock down here. So these are all mountain regions, all three of these, but this one right there is the plateau. And you can see nice, flat, horizontal sedimentary bedrock and changes in elevation. You can see the rolling hills. Okay, so that one is the plateau. All right. Now, just to take a look at the United States as a whole, and you can see New York is kind of tucked into this little region right over here. This as a whole, we in Syracuse are right on the border of this line between the Appalachian Plateau as well as what's called the interior lowlands. And I'm going to show you that later. We're actually going to drive up to the Appalachian Plateau. We're in Syracuse in the interior lowlands, which goes right into the middle of the country. So places in the middle of the country that are pretty flat are actually connected with Syracuse and Rochester and Buffalo in New York State. Everybody along the Lake Ontario border there. Okay, and then you can see out into the west. You get into more mountainous region out here. Okay, and you can see some mountains running down through here. These are the Appalachian Mountains. Along the coast here, you see the Atlantic coastal plain going down into Florida. So a lot of different landscape types all throughout the United States. Now let's take a look at the New York State map. And by the way, this is on page 3 in your reference, or sorry, page 2 in your reference table, okay, which we compare with page 3 as well. So I want to show you guys, we're right around this spot right in here, the Erie, Ontario lowlands, which you'll notice they're called lowlands, but they're also called plains. Okay, so the lowland and plain, they're the same exact thing. And you can see this little tiny landscape region, which is around Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, is part of a bigger region, a much more major landscape region called the interior lowlands. And then if you go a little bit to the south of us, it's called the Allegheny Plateau. The Allegheny Plateau is part of a much bigger region called the Appalachian Plateau, which we saw on the previous slide here. Okay. The Tug Hill Plateau is actually part of that as well. You've probably heard of the Tug. And then you get up into this region, and we know about the Adirondack Mountains. Adirondack Mountains are part of what's called the Grenville Province, the highlands. Okay, so highlands are mountains, uplands are plateaus, and lowlands are plains. Just to make it more confusing for you, I apologize. Okay, and then you can see some of the other landscape regions that are around here. Off to the east of us, we have the Hudson Mohawk lowlands, which are, that's the Hudson River that runs north-south, and then the Mohawk River, which is running east-west here. The Champlain lowlands up to the northeast, up by Lake Champlain up there. And so you can see some of these other places. The Atlantic coastal plain down here, that's where that glacial moraine called Long Island is located. Okay, so a lot of these different landscape regions are connected to larger ones throughout the country. All right, now what I did, and I would like you to do, and you're going to have to pause your video for this, I highlighted this. So what I did was, if you want to look at mine, I did this with a highlighter as well. You guys can't really see that, but you get the general picture. Okay, I highlighted with 3 different colors. One color for lowlands or plains, one color for plateaus, and one color for mountains. And you can see, in this case, the green are the lowlands or plains. The orangey color here are the plateaus, and the red are the mountains. Okay, so that might be a good idea for you to just highlight the word, and you'll be able to kind of see the difference between all the different landscape regions around New York State. Okay, so that's if you want to pause your video at this point and get some highlighters out and actually highlight, that'd be a worthwhile thing to do. All right, so just a few questions to kind of wrap this up. The landscape regions, so this question says, the generalized landscape regions of New York State are classified according to what? And I'll pause and let you think about that. So look through your choices, figure out which ones really don't make any sense. And again, you can compare that to your New York State map here. The generalized landscape regions of New York State are classified according to what? And if you go down the list, the best answer is A, bedrock structure and elevation. Remember, bedrock structure is referring to, like, is it nice and flat? What kind of bedrock is it? And elevation changes. Okay, so we looked at that as well. All right, next one. Which New York State landscape feature was formed primarily as a result of glacial deposition? So this kind of links back into what we were just talking about, our previous lessons. So glacial deposition, we're dropping stuff off. We're pushing with a glacier and dropping all that stuff off. So which one would be created by a glacier? And if you look through the choices, the only one that really makes sense here is D, Long Island. Long Island, remember, was the glacial moraine. It was the pushing of the glacier. It stopped, dropped everything off, and deposited Long Island. Okay? All right. Now, just a couple of factors to wrap up here that influence landscape development, how it changes over time. Geologic factors. So, we were talking earlier about squishing this together. We're talking about plate movements, upward and downward movements. So as it squishes together, it moves the crust up. That's going to change the landscape from something like a plain to something more like a mountain. It's going to change the bedrock. It's going to squish it, melt it, okay, pressurize it. That's going to change what type of rock is located there. So geologic factors are going to influence what the landscape changes over time. And it's a really slow process. Climate is a little bit quicker process. So climate affects the landscape as well. As we, rain falls on the landscape, as we have more weathering, we're going to change what that landscape looks like. And we looked earlier about, the rounded hills of like south of us versus like the Grand Canyon where it's more flat. And I believe I have a picture coming up. Yep, right here. So this is one of the Finger Lakes. I forget which one. These are, again, rounded hills. All right, so nice and we would classify this probably as a plateau. As you can see, there's a lot of relief there, the big hills there. Drops down and then comes back up again. Versus this, which, again, you can see there are some pretty steep hills here that jump up. But notice the difference. I mean, nice and rounded and more step-like, where you're jumping up very, very fast vertically. These are both plateaus, but this is a desert region. This is a more humid region. And again, with more weathering in a humid region where there's more water, you're going to have more weathering, more rounding. Where you have less weathering, you have more step-like landscape. Okay? So I'm going to stop there. The rest of this gets into drainage, and I'm probably going to treat that a little bit separately. Now we're going to go out into the field, and I want to show you a couple of places that are like close to home around Syracuse, and so we'll be going there next. Hope you enjoyed. Guys, I'm actually driving in my car. I've got my tripod set up next to me in the passenger seat, and it's really, really difficult to show you guys a landscape region from just a picture. So I figured I'd drive and show you how much rolling is going on here. I'm going up and down hills. I'm actually heading south back towards Syracuse. I was up near Route 20 looking for a good vantage point to take a picture from, and I couldn't find anything, so I figured why not just drive and show you how much the terrain is rolling here. So I'm up in the Allegheny Plateau just south of Syracuse, and as you can see, the roads around here are pretty windy, they're pretty hilly, and you know, there's good farmland around here, as you can see by some of the barns that I'm passing. But I'm going up and down hills here. So a good characteristic, if you look into the background there, there's some pretty decent hills around here. Good characteristic of a plateau are these rolling hills, up and down. I'm going on a pretty steep decline here, and I'm going to hold onto the tripod so it doesn't tip over while we're going, and around a bend here. So again, plateaus are characterized by big rolling hills, lots of change in elevation, but also the idea that below our feet, below my wheels, I guess I should say, is sedimentary bedrock. So a lot of shale and limestone around here. Anyway, hopefully that gave you kind of a picture of what's going on. And our next stop after this is a plane. Alright, here we go, guys. If you want to get sick in a car, come through this little road here. I'm going through a tiny little river valley that cuts through some of the plateau. And as you can see, we're winding and snaking our way through this little this valley here. It's a V-shaped valley carved by a stream. That's something to take note of. Remember, V-shaped valley for stream, U-shaped valley for glacier. And as you can see, I'm winding back and forth and back and forth. We're in a little area called Cedarvale, just south of Syracuse. Okay, so there's a big S-turn there. Anyway, I would have loved to get down in that stream, but I didn't bring the right shoes today. So anyway, just wanted to show you guys some of the erosion that the stream can do. It cuts through a valley like this and just carves its way through, back and forth, back and forth. So anyway, hopefully you didn't get sick and threw up on your computer screen or on your cell phone. Alright, that's it. Hey guys, last stop for today. I'm at the Erie Canal in Camillus, actually at the 9 Mile Creek aqueduct, which you can kind of see behind me. I just wanted to show you this as an example of a lowland. We're in the Erie, Ontario lowland, so I brought my reference table with me. It's nice that we're not driving anymore. I'm starting to get car sick back there. Anyway, I just wanted to show you guys an example of a lowland. You can see the Erie Canal goes east-west all the way from Buffalo to Albany. And they built it in the lowlands because it's a lot easier to cut through a flatter area than the plateau of the Allegheny region. Anyway, this is my last stop. Remember, plains or lowlands are cut into bedrock that's flat, horizontal, sedimentary bedrock, and pretty low lying, so close to Lake Ontario here. Anyway, that's it.